the English football Premier League season has taken or is taking a mini break. The weather intervened to cancel Manchester City's match yesterday. Liverpool are away in the sunshine, and their lead is so big that they are certain winners, really. Meanwhile, in Spain, there have been some very interesting developments at Barcelona in particular, but at Real Madrid. Many of you who listen to our podcast when we talk about soccer will know that Lionel Messi has been linked in the past week with a move to the Premier League, to Manchester City, where his old coach Pep Guardiola is in charge. How realistic that is, we'll find out, because we're joined from Spain now by Richard Fitzpatrick, an Irishman living in Barcelona, an Irish journalist who contributes to the Irish Times and many other publications, and happily contributes to us on the stand as well. Richard, thank you very much for joining us. The Messi story first surfaced about 10 days ago. He is able to, despite being the best player in history, I think many agree now, certainly the greatest player I've ever seen, and still at 32, a hugely influential player, that he can leave next summer, Barcelona, for free. And of course, I also understand that if he stays until his career ends, he gets a 50 million bonus, but I'm sure you'll confirm that. First of all, to the question of his contract. It seems remarkable that a player of his stature, the greatest ever perhaps, should be able to have the right to walk next summer. Yet, if you're negotiating with him and he demands that, what can you say?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a curious situation. His contract with Barcelona is not unique. Previous star players with the club, like Andres Iniesta and Carlos Puyol, would have had similar clauses where they could walk away from the club. And, you know, we remember Pep Guardiola used to have a rolling one-year contract as manager at the club. At a deeper seated level, the problem with Messi is that he doesn't get on well with this board. So it would never have been in his interests to make things easy for them. He's had several big problems with his contract renewals over the last 7 or 8 years. So this clause would make sense for him. It doesn't tie him down to the club. It gives him a degree of power. And he uses that power well.
Yes, and it's significant, I think, that Eric Abidal, a former colleague of his, a player in the team and a very good fullback, is now the director of football, if I understand correctly. And Messi last week was publicly critical of Abidal. Am I correct in all the things I said about Abidal, a former player, colleague of Messi's, now director of football?
Exactly. And
I should also add, someone that was afflicted by cancer very seriously when he was playing, but happily appears to have recovered.
Yeah, I think it's important. I'm glad you mentioned those details. They're all correct. It's important to set the context and explain who this guy Eric Abidal is and his part in the story. So as you suggest, he was a very fine player. He played in the World Cup final for France in 2006, and a season later he joined Barca, where he was at the club for 6 seasons. He was a linchpin in that team that won 2 European Cups during that period. And then, as you mentioned, the big event in his life was he got cancer, and so if you could just look at the timeline, in March 2011, he gets cancer. He's rushed into hospital for an operation. The operation is a success, and miraculously, 6 or 8 weeks later, he's back on the pitch playing for Barcelona. He came on as a sub in the second leg of the semi-final of the Champions League against Real Madrid. At the final whistle, the players gathered around him in the centre circle to serenade him.
Yes.
It was a very emotional night at the Camp Nou. A few weeks later, he actually started in the UEFA Champions League final against Manchester United, the high point of Pep Guardiola's reign. They destroyed Man United 3-1. Carlos Puyol came on. He was the club captain at the time. He came on as a sub, but he allowed Abidal to collect the trophy at the end. So it was, again, another very emotional day for Barca fans. A year later, he gets a relapse. He's back in hospital, and he has to get a liver transplant. Dani Alves, a former great Barcelona player and a teammate at the time, actually offered to provide that transplant for him, but he turned him down. So he's a big figure in the history of Barcelona, which is probably a more sentimental club than most. So he's brought back into the fold 2 years ago in the summer of 2018 as a right-hand man to the club's sporting director. But he has no experience in the job. He's no experience as a sporting director. He doesn't know how to navigate that world, to make those business deals, to get transfers done. And as we'll see, he has no political instincts either. So he's in the job a year. The club fired the sporting director, Pep Segura. So Abidal is promoted into the job, and he's floundered since. He had a disastrous winter transfer window in January. The club lost at the start of January the Spanish Super Cup. Luis Suarez was injured, so they need a replacement number 9. They go scampering around Europe looking to replace him. They tried Rodrigo at Valencia, Aubameyang at Arsenal, a number of players. There was one laughable incident where they got a guy, Cedric Bakambu, a Congolese striker who's playing down in China, who used to play with Villarreal. Yeah. They got him to get on a plane to get up to Spain. He got as far as South Korea. Abidal phoned him and said, "Oh no, we've moved on to other targets." So he posted a comment on social media saying his status should be changed on Transfermarkt, a German website, to almost Barcelona. The club failed to get in a striker. At the same time, Abidal was selling off the strikers that it had in the club. 2 players from the academy, one of them Carlos Perez, who's been a first team squad player all season. So they sell those 2 reserve strikers. They're now left with 3 forwards on their squad. They only had 14 players available for their game at Real Betis at the weekend. They had to play with 2 strikers. Traditionally, they play with 3 strikers because they're short. One of those 3 strikers is 17-year-old Ansu Fati. So Abidal has been making a hames of it. There was the infamous escapade with the replacement of Valverde as coach last month. Again, they went to several people looking to replace him. Javi Hernandez, Ronald Koeman, Mauricio Pochettino. Eventually, they settled on a guy, Kiki Setien, who we can perhaps talk about later. So this is the background. Abidal hasn't been doing well in his job. He gets summoned to a meeting with his boss, the club president, Josep Maria Bartomeu, Sunday week ago, about 8 days ago. Bartomeu backs him. He gives him a vote of confidence. Emboldened, Abidal walks out 2 days later, and he gives 2 interviews to the top 2 sports papers in Catalonia,
yes.
Mundo Deportivo and Diario Sport. And he's like a loose cannon. In the interview with Diario Sport, he blames the players for not working hard enough, and critically he says that they were responsible for Valverde getting the sack.
Yes.
So this infuriates Messi. People couldn't believe it. Within 90 minutes, Messi came out, that interview had been published, he came out on social media and posted a statement. He never does this. He rarely gives interviews, as we know, just maybe a few fluff pieces during the summer and television in Argentina, the odd other interview, but rarely comes out in public. So he comes out, posts this comment saying, haranguing Abidal, saying, asking Abidal to name names, saying that he by not naming names he's dirtying all the players and by implication Messi as the team's leader. So the club is thrown into crisis. Everybody presumes that Abidal will be fired. Bartomeu, the club president, meets him the next day. He decides to keep him on and paper over the cracks, and the club moved on. A day later, they were dumped out of the Copa del Rey by Athletic Bilbao. So it's caused huge tremors in the city. Bartomeu, the incumbent president, has 18 months left to run on his mandate, but there's quite possibly going to be an election fast forward until next summer instead, if things don't go well on the pitch and they're not looking too hot at the moment.
Now, presumably, Richard, this is the background you've given us, and it's very interesting indeed. It's fascinating because there are other reasons to question the power Lionel Messi wields at the club regarding other players, but we'll come to that. This is a background to, I assume, the stories linking him with the Premier League and specifically with Manchester City. Now, Pep Guardiola has rebutted this. He said he doesn't believe he'll ever leave Barcelona. His children are at school there. The upheaval would be too much. He has, we read, a 50 million bonus if he stays until the end of his career with Barcelona. So, can we say that we may see Lionel Messi, if these problems continue, we may see him in the Premier League, or is Pep Guardiola's take on it correct?
Yeah, as somebody close to the club said to me at the weekend, Messi could well leave the club and return. Barca fans would take him back, but if the directors that were responsible for losing him let him go, they would not only have to leave Barcelona, they'd have to leave Europe.
Yeah,
it would be very, very unlikely. I think Pep Guardiola, he's obviously born and bred in Barcelona, would know Messi better than most.
Yes.
He's correct in saying it's very unlikely that Messi will leave. Messi is fed up at the moment. He wants to win trophies. The club have failed to build a team to help him win the UEFA Champions League title again since they last won it in 2015. So there's a small chance that if things went up in flames by the end of the season, that he might be lured away.
Yes.
But it's very, very unlikely. There's obviously only 3 or 4 clubs that could afford to get him in. Yes, he would go on a free transfer, but his salary, I mean, it's at 106 million a year, which is almost twice as much as the next guy in line, Cristiano Ronaldo or Neymar, would make. So you'd be limiting yourselves to clubs like Paris Saint-Germain, Man City, with his connections with Pep Guardiola. But again, I don't know how that works, because Man City don't have a reputation, or their strategy isn't to buy in Galactico players at that level.
No.
And Manchester United wouldn't even come into the frame. It's unlikely they'll be playing Champions football season.
They'd need him to stand in for Paul Pogba, who hasn't been seen for several months. Anyway, just to conclude, Eamon, I think you're right in those comments you make about his personality. The guy, he's very introverted. He's lived more than 2/3 his life in the city. It would be very disruptive for him, as he's mentioned a lot lately in interviews, for him to move his family. From a romantic standpoint, he has always mentioned he'd like to play a season or so in with Newell's Old Boys, his team in Rosario. But for family reasons, he's suggested that that's unlikely. So yeah, they're the kind of personal reasons why he wouldn't move as well. Yeah, and the weather in Manchester isn't great anyway. Now,
no, true.
Richard, there is about this greatest footballer we've ever seen, and whose debt we will always be, I think, and anybody who's seen him, any child, any adult who's been fortunate enough to see him, has had their lives enriched, really. There is another question, and it seems to be about his influence in the dressing room, and in particular, when new players arrive. Luis Suarez arrived from Liverpool. They get on very well, and that Suarez has done well for Barcelona. Neymar arrived. He also formed a good relationship with Messi, and that trio of Messi, Neymar, and Suarez were feared. They won the Champions League together. Now, there is the other side, of course. Antoine Griezmann, who went there for 120 million from Atletico Madrid last summer. It hasn't been such a happy experience for him. Philippe Coutinho went from Liverpool, another big money signing. Dembele, another big money signing. And Frankie de Jong, who went from Ajax, all appear to have shrunk in the presence of Lionel Messi. I should say, I borrowed the phrase shrunk from a very good Irish sports writer, Ken Early. He does, it seems, have the power to, as it were, grow people such as Suarez and Neymar, or shrink people if they can't, reconcile themselves and be compatible with him.
Yeah, it's a fascinating question. Perhaps we might come on to kind of the tacit power that Messi has at the club, but as regards his kind of relationship with the players and whether he can grow them or whether they diminish in his presence, it's true that definitely the key to getting on, as it would be in any walk of life, is when the players gel with him socially, when they get on well with him, and when he respects them. He has that respect for Neymar and for Luis Suarez. Some of the other examples you mentioned, like say the case of Antoine Griezmann. So here's a guy who's walked into a maelstrom. The club hasn't been doing well this season. There's just a huge malaise around the club. He has joined a club where his position is already taken by Messi. This has happened before, say with a guy like David Villa,
yes,
who's Spain's all-time greatest striker, and people widely regard him as such. So he joined in 2010. He was told that he would get Messi's position when he before he signed. That didn't happen. He was shunted out onto the wing. He didn't score at as good a scoring rate for Barca during the 3 or 4 seasons he was there. He scored less than he had done at previous clubs like Valencia and Sporting Gijón. But he did succeed. He won league titles and a Champions League trophy. It's just that he had to play second fiddle because Messi occupied his position. Griezmann has been in a similar situation.
Yes.
He's done adequately this season. He hasn't thrived, but he is in that position. He's actually third in line when Suarez was fit, so he has to take a diminished role. But other players then definitely wilt in his presence. Coutinho is a good example. That guy he didn't have the personality to prosper at Barcelona. And if you go further down the line to kind of squad players, they noticeably deteriorate in the presence of Messi. But that's because they're not at the caliber of a great club like Barcelona. Partly. So, yeah, it's an interesting area.
Now, you said we talk about his influence at the club. It appears to be all pervasive, really. Although in the case of Abidal that you described to us earlier, the present sporting director appears to have stood his ground. Briefly, anyway, that might mean the end of the sporting director, of course. Now, it's inevitable, I suppose, that a great player will have some influence, but it's unthinkable in an English context, for example, that a player would have that kind of influence. I mean, there have been so many great players, and we're talking relatively recently, but there's no question that Jurgen Klopp manages and is the head coach or whatever you want to call him, but he is the man who calls the shots at Liverpool, and the idea that a player, any player, could wield the kind of influence. But of course, Lionel Messi is a phenomenon, the likes of which we have never seen before.
Yeah, you raised some fascinating points there. I'm glad you mentioned Jurgen Klopp. During the summer, Messi asked for the club to buy Neymar. The club made failed attempts that summer to find Neymar. The big problem was they didn't have the money and they couldn't afford to buy him. They'd already taken out a 35 million euro loan to get the Griezmann transfer over the line.
Yes.
So one of the suggestions that was being put forward was that the players, and this came from the players, that senior players like Piqué, Suarez and Messi would defer payments on their salary so they could get Neymar into the club. It was a laughable idea. Can you imagine a situation?
Yeah, I mean, the other thing, Richard, I mean, it is a laughable idea, but also the way Neymar is behaving himself at Paris Saint-Germain is absolutely incredible. It's extremely unprofessional. I mean, he had his birthday party 2 days before a match last Sunday night, all white in a nightclub in Paris. The party ended at 3 a.m. They had a match on Tuesday.
Yeah,
I mean, this is La La Land, you know?
Absolutely, and that behaviour would have been flagged. You could set your clock by it. When he was at Barcelona, he always missed the games after his birthday. He concocted various excuses, and similarly for his sister's birthday, which fell in early March, I think. Last summer there was all kinds of problems shrouding Neymar. He was involved in a rape case allegation, which came to nothing. But he's patently not delivered. He's 27, 28 now, at this stage 28, and he's failed for Brazil. Messi still holds a soft spot for him in his heart, and that's why he wanted to get him back and rekindle those memories of 2015 when they were such an amazing trident. But
yes.
It's quite clear to most observers that Neymar doesn't have the temperament to deliver consistently. No. But that idea that the players would cobble together the money to buy in this player, it would never happen at a club run by Fenway Sports Group, for example. But it speaks to the power that the players have at Barcelona.
All of this raises a question, Richard, about Lionel Messi's professionalism at this point in his career. That he is abusing, in my judgment, abusing his power, that he is surrounded by, in terms of administration, weak people, and that he is not doing his club any favours, and he is not really doing himself any favours, because he has to play.
Yeah, I think in his defence, you just have to say, look at his performances on the pitch. They've been extraordinary. The problem there is he's been surrounded by weaker players. The team is a shadow of the team that won that Champions League in 2015. You've lost Iniesta. Suarez is 5 years later. Neymar, for all his problems, is gone. The club have failed to buy in players to replace the likes of Iniesta or Dani Alves. So he's surrounded by lesser players. There's a big power vacuum at the club because it's run so shambolically by the president and his board of directors. So Messi has to step into that vacuum. It's not something he's doing willingly. He's not a political animal by nature, and it's not premeditated. It's just it comes as a result of the extraordinary power he's accrued at the club.
Of course, and he is the senior or a senior professional in the dressing room. Remind me who's top of La Liga.
Real Madrid by 3 points.
Oh, I thought you were going to say Barcelona. They were joint top last week. So I was going to make a joke against myself, Richard, just to point out that despite everything, they were top of the league, but they're not. And they're out of the Copa del Rey. So that's not good news. Who have they got in the Champions League?
They've got Napoli, which is one of the easier draws. But,
well, yeah, that's true. Actually, they have a crazy chairman who's just managed to sack Carlo Ancelotti, but never mind that. Just to round things up, Richard, the situation at Madrid also has been unstable. There's almost permanent instability there. How is Zinedine Zidane doing? Has Gareth Bale been rehabilitated? And what's the story there? Because they, of course, have this massive Champions League game against Manchester City, coached rather by Pep Guardiola.
Yeah, who wouldn't be a favourite at Real Madrid, as you can imagine, given his Barcelona background. Zidane has done well in the job. The report card is good. He was in dire straits in September, October time. They were trounced 3-0 by Paris Saint-Germain in the Champions League. They had an embarrassing 1-0 defeat to Mallorca in the league, and Mourinho was waiting in the wings to take over at the club, but he's turned the ship around. They've gone unbeaten in the league and the Champions League since then. So they pulled ahead of Barca in the league, as we mentioned, by 3 points. So he's done well. He's done a couple of things. He's resurrected the careers of players like Isco, who had hardly played in a year, and he's been playing well again. Toni Kroos has been exceptional this season. As we mentioned, Paul Pogba earlier in the conversation.
Yes.
Zidane was very hot on Pogba. He failed to get him in the summer.
Unbelievable.
That he invented this guy Fede Valverde, a young Uruguayan box-to-box midfielder who's been, people are talking about him as the find of the century at Real Madrid. He's a very exciting all-action player. And
is he a midfield player, Richard?
A midfield player, yeah. And alongside Casemiro as the holding midfielder in the team, they've been brilliant all season. And this is the bedrock of their success to date.
Sorry, Richard, go on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, why they've been doing so well since those wobbles in September, October, is that they've been really, really solid in defence. They've their best defensive record in the history of their league campaigns, going back over a century.
Wow. This
season so far. They've only conceded 14 goals, I think. So they've been really solid. They're like Diego Simeone team. People are talking about them, but they don't have the goals up front. Benzema has been very good. He's only a goal behind Messi in the league.
Yeah, Benzema, I imagine, would be a serious threat to the Manchester City defence, which isn't very good.
Yeah, he's been excellent since Cristiano Ronaldo left a season and a half ago. He's really stepped up to the plate. But outside him, they don't have goals. Eden Hazard has been injured for most of the season, but he'll likely be back for that City game. He still hasn't played yet. They held off from bringing him for their away game at the weekend against Osasuna, but he will be struggling for match fitness. So that is the concern they have at Real Madrid is the lack of goals, but they definitely fancied themselves against Man City.
Yeah, just a question finally, Richard, on Eden Hazard. He was superb for Chelsea. There were rumours that he got seriously overweight when he went to Spain, which he apparently admitted to. Which amazed me, really. Were they true, those rumours?
They were true, yeah. It's a problem in the Real Madrid squad. Marcelo was 7 pounds overweight last season as well. So he arrived, he's 28, he arrived after having a relaxing summer, like you say, overweight. He struggled to get going, then he got an injury, which perhaps is tied to that lack of fitness.
Of course.
He came back, then it took him a while to get into his groove, but then he started playing well, but then picked up a very unfortunate injury in the Champions League against Paris Saint-Germain. It was an ankle injury from a late challenge. So he's been out for, that's late November, so more than 2 months. So he's been unfortunate, but I'm sure he will come good for them once he's fit.
Okay, and just a final word on Messi. The Barcelona club, it's a owned really by the fans, and it's a great model, it seems to me, and a knowledgeable crowd. He is still unquestionably their idol. Is he in any way questioned about the power he is that he wields, and in particular in relation to the matters we've been discussing, or is it still unquestioned, adoration, really?
Yeah, it's definitely unquestioned adoration. Just to conclude on the power he wields, it's a kind of he's like a silent leader. He's not a proactive guy in a political sense. Yes, he does wield this extraordinary power. But for example, when the club have gone to him, it's inevitable they consult with him. It'd be foolish not to, obviously, given his stature and his knowledge about the game. So they do consult him on transfers, for example. But the evidence, I mean, he wanted Neymar in. They failed to get Neymar. Several years ago, they asked him what striker he wanted to get. He said his friend Kun Aguero, who was at Man City at the time, this was the summer of 2014. They failed to get him. They got Luis Suarez in instead, who worked better, you would argue, than perhaps Aguero would have in the club. So it's not like he dictates everything, and this is why he was so angry. He came out during the week. He was so furious with Abidal because Abidal basically claimed that it was Messi's decision to get rid of Valverde. Messi always had a good relationship with Valverde, so he wasn't in control of that situation. He would have been consulted as things were developing, but he wasn't calling the shots. Somebody remarked last week that the club would do better maybe if Messi was president. But
of course, I think we could conclude perhaps by thinking, Richard, that he is a reluctant wielder of power.
It's a very good way to put it. Yeah.
But the greatest player the game has ever known. Okay, Richard, thank you very much for joining us from Barcelona. We're very grateful to you. Very grateful.